So let's talk about a case that's making its way to the Supreme Court. It all started back in 2015 with a Kentucky clerk who refused to issue a marriage license. Now that one act has snowballed into a legal battle that's knocking on the highest court's door. And what's at stake? Well, it's pretty huge. The very foundation of marriage equality in the U.S., which was established by that landmark Obergefell v. Hodges ruling.
So this really brings up a huge question. Could a landmark ruling like this actually be overturned? I mean, for a lot of people, this was settled law. But, after we've seen the Supreme Court reverse other major precedents recently, the idea of walking back established rights, well, it's not so hypothetical anymore. This case has become a major test for how stable our laws really are.
And let's be clear, this is not just some abstract legal debate. We're talking about real people. There are nearly 800,000 married same-sex couples in the United States right now. These are families, people who have built their entire lives on the foundation of a right that's suddenly being challenged.
Okay, so how did we even get here? To understand what's happening, we've got to rewind back to 2015. It all started with a single act of defiance by a woman named Kim Davis. She was the county clerk in Rowan County, Kentucky, and her decision that day set off a whole chain of events that has, believe it or not, led all the way to the Supreme Court.
And the backdrop for all of this, the reason it was even an issue, is the massive 2015 Supreme Court decision, Obergefell v. Hodges. I mean, that ruling was a game changer. It totally redrew the legal map for marriage in America and established it as a constitutional right for everyone.
This timeline really shows you what a long, winding road this has been. So right after the Obergefell ruling came down in 2015, Kim Davis refused to issue marriage licenses. This actually led to her being jailed for a short time for contempt of court. Then, a few years later, in 2018, she lost a re-election bid. But even that didn't stop the legal fight. It has just kept going and going for years, and now it's all come to a head with his final appeal to the Supreme Court.
All right, so let's break down the core legal conflict here, because it's a big one. It's this fundamental clash that started in a small county office in Kentucky and has now gone all the way to the top. We're talking about the tension between personal religious freedom on one side and the public duty of a government official on the other. And this really lays it out. At its heart, you've got this battle between two really powerful principles. On one hand, there's Kim Davis's argument. She says her First Amendment right to religious freedom protects her conscience. But on the other hand, the lower courts have consistently said, nope. They've ruled that because she's a government official, her duty to uphold the law and serve every single citizen has to come first.
And the U.S. Court of Appeals was, incredibly clear about this. I mean, look at this quote. They said, the Bill of Rights would serve little purpose if it could be freely ignored whenever an official's conscience so dictates. They're basically saying that constitutional rights would be pretty meaningless if any government official could just decide not to follow them based on their personal beliefs.
Okay, but here's where things get really interesting. This appeal is no longer just about Kim Davis or the money she was ordered to pay. Her lawyers have escalated this way beyond that. They are making a monumental, a huge ask of the Supreme Court, and it's something that could affect the entire country. What are they asking? They are explicitly, directly asking the Supreme Court to completely overturn its own 2015 Obergefell decision, and the argument they're using might sound familiar. They're saying that, similar to the reasoning used to overturn Roe v. Wade, the right to same-sex marriage isn't grounded in the nation's history or traditions.
So, you're probably wondering, what are the chances of this actually happening? Well, it all comes down to the 9 justices. We really have to look at them, especially the conservative members of the court, who have either dissented on this before or have made comments about it since.
So, if we take a look at some of the key conservative justices, you see a bit of a mixed bag. Justice Thomas, he's been very clear. He has explicitly called for overturning the ruling. Justice Alito has been critical of the decision, but he recently said he's not actively trying to get it reversed. And then you have Justice Amy Coney Barrett, who has brought up something called reliance interests. That's basically the idea that, hey, hundreds of thousands of people have relied on this right, gotten married, and built their families, so just ripping it away now would be incredibly disruptive. And it's really important to remember how the court actually works. You only need 4 of the 9 justices to say, yeah, let's hear this case. But, and this is a big but, you need a majority of 5 to actually overturn a previous ruling. That's a much higher bar to clear, and it's why a lot of legal experts think this is a real long shot. Still, the possibility is there, even if it's a slim one.
So that brings us to the biggest question of all, right? What is actually at stake here? Why does this one case matter so much? Because the real-world impact, it would go way, way beyond just this one legal dispute. I mean, just think about it.
If obergefell were overturned, the consequences would be immediate and just massive. First off, the legal status of all those existing marriages could suddenly be questioned. The federal protection for the right to marry would just disappear. And that means we'd go back to this chaotic, state-by-state patchwork of laws. On top of all that, a ruling like this could embolden other officials to start defying laws they don't agree with based on their own personal beliefs.
And you know, at the end of the day, this case forces us all to think about a really fundamental question, one that's much bigger than just marriage. Once the Supreme Court says something is a right, when is it actually secure? When can we say a legal decision is truly, finally settled? It's a tough question, and this case puts it front and center.